All right, it is 4:50, so we will go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for attending the 2020 Sunstone Digital Symposium, session 174, titled Ask the Truth and Transparency Foundation. The audio from this session will be available for purchase at sunstone.org after the symposium. The video recording of this session will be available in the Jehovah app for approximately 3 months, beginning at the end of August 2020. A large portion of this session will be with a Q&A. And so if you have questions that you would like to pose, then please go ahead and put that in the Jehovah app. And we'll be looking at those and screening those questions there. On the Zoom features, there is a raise a hand feature. We're not looking at that. The only way with interaction with the presenters will be through the Jehovah app, through entering in questions. At Sunstone, we are making it a goal to build a community that allows many ways for people to express their faith. Our tagline is, "There is more than one way to Mormon." We invite you to help us build a community where all paths are given space to be better understood. Please support us in our mission by making a donation and subscribing at sunstone.org. Here's a little bit more about this presentation. The Truth and Transparency Foundation is responsible for revealing the pay rates of LDS General authorities, tying $32 billion to the LDS Church and revealing the abuse that eventually led to the imprisonment of Sterling Van Wagenen. Come ask the founders anything. And then here's a little introduction for our speakers, our presenters. Ryan McKnight is a Las Vegas-based accountant, former agent with the Nevada Gaming Control Board, and co-founder of the Truth and Transparency Foundation, a nonprofit newsroom dedicated to promoting transparency within religious institutions. Ethan Gregory Dodge is a data security and privacy professional and co-founder of the Truth and Transparency Foundation, a nonprofit newsroom dedicated to promoting transparency within religious institutions. Thank you so much for being here, and I'll now give the floor to our presenters.
Okay. Can you hear me, Heidi?
Yeah.
Okay.
Great.
Thank you everybody for coming. It looks like we've got around 50 people, which is maybe a little better than I expected. I wasn't sure what to expect here. So what we're gonna do here today, we want this to be as much of an AMA style thing as possible. We want you guys to have as much time to ask questions as possible. So we're going to try to take 10 or 15 minutes to go through some of the bigger stories that we've had since the last time we spoke at Sunstone, which for those that aren't keeping track, we did not speak last year. So we are going to talk about some stories that occurred before last year's Sunstone. And, some things that we have going on right now. And then we're going to open up to questions. So the majority of this session is going to be questions. So get your questions ready. There, I would say there's no question that's off limits, so ask anything. That doesn't mean we're going to answer every question, of course. Those that have done these things with us know that. But Phil, don't be afraid to ask any question because you think you might offend us or you're not allowed to ask it. Ask any question. So Ethan, I think, is going to share his screen. Simple little PowerPoint that we have. Just to sort of keep us on track here. You want to go to that first screen, Ethan, and I'll just kind of, or did you want to say anything before we dive in, Ethan?
No, go for it, man.
Okay. So we had this story back in, that was published back in January of 2019 that most of you probably have heard about. Sterling Van Wagenen. I was contacted by Sean Escobar, who was one of Van Wagenen's victims back in the, I guess it would have been in the early 90s. And he contacted me in late 2018 with this tape, which was, I felt was quite explosive. And I worked with him. There was, he was deciding whether or not he wanted to even make this public. He ultimately did decide to. He stayed anonymous initially, as many know. And it was a pretty powerful story because of who Sterling Van Wagenen is. And he directed the Temple movies that were in circulation at that time. I can't remember, was it 2 or 3 movies? Do you remember, Ethan? I always forget if it was 2 or 3 movies. But anyway, whatever the movies that were in circulation that were made, it was 3. Yeah, they were made like 2014, 2015-ish. He was the director, and he was a co-founder of Sundance Film Festival with Robert Redford, and his fame, I think, and waned somewhat in the last decade or so, but in the 80s and the 90s, he was definitely a very well-known Mormon filmmaker, and worked for many years in the BYU film department. And it was a pretty powerful experience, I think, to be a part of that story and to break that story. And it kind of led to some unexpected things, which Ethan's going to touch on what the story led to. But if just so you guys know real quick before Ethan gets into the second half of this story, we're probably not going to be deep diving these stories right now. We just want to kind of give the highlights. And if anybody has questions about any of the details of the story, then, cue those up in your questions.
Yeah, just giving a high-level overview of some stories that have come out since we last spoke at Sunstone. So yeah, as Ryan said, we released this tape that had Sean Escobar confronting Sterling Van Wagenen about sexually molesting him when he was a child, and we were able to verify the story. It was via police reports and whatnot, and when we released that story, that actually led to another survivor of Van Wagenen's coming forward. One thing that was unfortunate about Escobar's case was that the statute of limitations had run out in the state of Utah. And so Van Wagenen was not able to be criminally charged in that case anymore. However, when this new survivor came forward, the statute of limitations had not run out. And so they went to the police and the Salt Lake County and Utah counties both prosecuted him, and he pleaded guilty to, it was the same survivor. It happened 2 different times, once in Salt Lake County, once in Utah County. And he pleaded guilty to both charges. And Ryan and I, we actually had the opportunity of being in the courtroom when he was sentenced. And that was pretty cool. And I actually live tweeted it, and I just wanted to share some live tweets, some tweets that I shared when we were there. The mother of the second, I originally said victim. This person is really a survivor. The mother of the survivor got up and gave a statement. She was holding back tears. Her daughter heard Sean Escobar's story and decided to come forward because she finally knew that what Van Wagenen did to her was wrong. Excuse me if I get emotional. She feels that Van Wagenen never had any intention to tell her what he did to her daughter. And Van Wagenen, when we published the original Escobar tape, this mother approached Van Wagenen and said, "Are there any other survivors?" And Van Wagenen straight up said, "No, there are not." But there were. This is from, these quotes right here, and these 3 tweets are directly from the survivor. She gave a statement. She wrote a statement that was actually read by her sister because she was not feeling up to reading it herself, and it was extremely powerful. And I kid you not, I was tweeting this from my phone through tears. It was very watery-eyed. I'm surprised there's not many typos. At least I haven't noticed any. But if it were up to me, you would have a lifelong sentence. I was ready to go to trial if it meant locking you away. Stop trying to apologize to me and my family. You should have come clean immediately. If there are other survivors, come clean. If not, you are minimizing the hell they are going through. Extremely powerful statements from the survivor. We were there when the judge sentenced him to 6 years to life in prison. The reason the minimum sentence is for the crime that he was charged with is usually 15 years, I believe. But he took a plea bargain and got it down to 6 years. He could still serve the maximum sentence of life. And actually the judge recommended to the state parole board that they make sure that Van Wagenen serves much longer than 6 years. And then we watched Van Wagenen be taken off in handcuffs. And that was extremely validating to our reporting, right? And probably one of the, probably the most validating moment that I've experienced in the 4 years that we've been doing this. So, and we'll go into the next story.
Yeah, just to tack onto that, I mean, I agree, like the emotion in that courtroom was so palpable. And, you know, it might not have been like our most widely circulated story, but I do feel it, you know, it was probably our most real world impactful story that we've been involved in. So anyway, you can go to the next slide. All right, so this next story I wanted to highlight is nowhere near as heavy as that one. This one is kind of a fun one, I thought, for me. We were contacted. I hate the fact that I'm blanking on this lady's name, but I was contacted by a lady whose grandmother is the subject of this story, and she kind of gave me the little rundown of how Russell Nelson had this book coming out, and as part of the promotion of the book, an excerpt had been published in, I believe, LDS magazine or some magazine that you get at Deseret Book. And the excerpt that they chose as part of this book promotion was the story of a story of her grandmother, and how, I guess, you know, President Nelson had played a part in her conversion or whatever. And her family was aware that Nelson had told this story over the years, or a variation of it. But they also knew that pretty much every time he had ever told it in public, he had embellished or changed relevant details of this story. So it was so she had contacted Deseret Book, and they ultimately pulled the story from the final publication of the book. Of course, the books were published with the story in it. And they actually had to recall books from, you know, they had already sent it out through their distribution chain to, you know, Amazon and the bookstores and all this kind of stuff. I spoke to somebody from some bookstore, I don't remember which bookstore it was, and I probably wouldn't say who it was anyway, that actually had to send a batch of these books back that had this story in it. And so they had to rush to reprint the book without this story. And basically the short version of it is that Nelson embellished the miraculous nature of this woman's conversion. And aside from that, literally sort of made up some facts about the conversion as well. And what's probably, I'm guessing, is that, and the other thing too is he's told this story on the record for years, and we found some, I think we included it in the original article, some Ensign publications maybe, or some other talks where he had told this story with different set of facts, with a different fact pattern. So it was really interesting. And one of my favorite parts about this story, I don't think it was included in the original write-up because we didn't know at the time. But if you go and purchase this book, if it's part of the first printing, I don't know if they've done a second printing or not, but if you buy this book and it's part of the first printing, there is still a reference to the story in the index of the book. So they removed the story from the book, but they forgot to remove the reference to the story in the index. So anyway, go ahead and go to the next one. That was an interesting one. And then, so we had this story here, was another big story for us in terms of scope. And I actually worked on this story on and off for about a year. It was in the summer, roughly in the summer of 2018, that this story first hit my radar. And I was basically, I was put in touch with the parents of one of the victims in this case. And that's kind of where this all started. And basically this guy, his name is Benjamin Alec. We named him in the article. He was his parents ran a daycare in their basement, and like a licensed actual business daycare. And he was secretly recording these children in the bathroom, not only when they went to the bathroom, but also when they were like changing into like swimsuits and things of that nature. And he was trading this child pornography on the black web for, according to the court documents, for more hardcore child pornography. And he went on a mission. He went on his mission to, I think it was the Dominican Republic or somewhere, some place like that. And it appears, we don't know for sure, but it appears, maybe he felt compelled to confess or something like that. For whatever reason, though, very shortly after going out on his mission, he was sent home for this child pornography. And anyway, through the whole process, the church never contacted the authorities. They don't have to in Utah. And so, which is where this all occurred. And luckily, the authorities did ultimately find out about it, not from church leaders, at least as far as we can tell. The downside of it is that he was able to finagle a plea agreement where, number one, he was charged as a minor, and number two, he ultimately ended up spending something like 12 weeks in juvenile detention as a 20-year-old, and he got out when he was on his 21st birthday, something like that. So there was not full justice, I would say, in this case for these children, but there was some justice, and the parents ultimately, luckily, were able to find out about it so that they knew what happened to their kids and that kind of thing. One of the interesting things I'll tell about this one, so one of the reasons why this story took like a year to publish was because we just didn't have enough proof of what happened. And because it was a juvenile case, it's, as many people know, it's really hard to find and to be able to get records on juvenile cases. And one of the things that I did early on, I think this was maybe in the fall of 2019, I was kind of at a dead end as far as being able to find proof of this story. And I kind of thought, well, this story just might never happen. And so as sort of a Hail Mary, I thought, well, maybe I'll call this guy, because I was able to track down his cell phone number. Maybe I'll call this guy and just see what he says. Maybe he'll confess to me on the phone or something, if I catch him off guard. And so I wanted to record the phone call, and I can't record phone calls secretly here where I live, legally anyway. So I drove to Arizona, which I live, for those that know Las Vegas know that the Arizona border is not that far away. So I drove on the other side of Hoover Dam and parked in one of their little parking lots over there. And I took like a video of me because I didn't know what to expect. I'm like, if I get like this crazy confession out of this guy, I don't want him coming back saying that I, did something wrong in the recording. So I like took a video with my cell phone of like where I was to show that I was in Arizona. And I called, and he actually answered the phone. And I was like, hey, is this Benjamin? And he, yeah, who is this? And I said, oh, well, I'm Ryan McKnight, with Mormon Leaks, and we're about to publish a story about this court case that you have been going through, and I wanted to give you an opportunity to tell your side or give your comment. And there was like this very sort of pregnant pause on the phone, and I could hear somebody who I think it was probably his mother whispering to him in the background, who is it? Tell him they have to talk to the attorney. And he just very nervously kind of said, well, you have to talk to my attorney, and hung up. He basically hung up on me. I didn't get anything out of him, but anyway, we were able to later on. I did totally give up on the story, because at that point, even though I didn't have any proof, I knew that this was probably a real story. So I didn't totally give up on it. And eventually, probably in June of 2019 or somewhere closer to when we published the story, we were able to get our hands on the search warrant, which had all of a recap of the detective's investigation or interview with him and all this kind of stuff. So anyway, I'm still leaving out a lot of details. People can go, if you haven't read the story, you should go read it, or if you guys have more questions about it. But that was a very interesting one. And I think it really highlighted, the reason why this is, I think, a really important story is because it really highlighted, like one of our upcoming, I don't know if it's the next slide or not, but another story we're going to talk about here, why it's so important for clergy to need to be able to report. Because even though the church could not have prevented what he did before they knew about it, once between the time the church knew about it and the time the law enforcement got involved, I think it was about a 9 or 10 month window, I believe. He was still living in his parents' home and they were still operating a daycare. Now, we don't know if he did anything during that time, but there obviously was an opportunity, and the Mormon church didn't do anything to mitigate that opportunity or minimize it. So go ahead and go to the next one there. Okay, this is you, Ethan.
Yeah, so let's see. So we've been going about 20 minutes. We're gonna push through, just go really fast over the rest of the slides that we got, so we could get straight to the questions. But in the fall of 2019, we actually made a conscious decision. Well, we needed to get some long-term funding or at least some funding to ensure our long-term financial stability, because we've been running on financial fumes. Anybody that looks at our finances, it's very apparent that we've been doing that for at that time we'd been operating 3 years, right? But we kind of had this chicken and egg situation where to get long-term funding through like grants and stuff like that, we needed other people on our board of directors that weren't just Ryan and myself, right? But to have other people on our board of directors, we couldn't ask them to come on to as directors without any liability insurance. Ryan and I had just been accepting that risk personally, and so we needed funding to get liability insurance. So we needed a board to get funding, and we needed funding to get a board. And so we actually did a huge fundraising push the fall of 2019, raised a good amount of money, and we had to pause publishing because of this whole liability insurance thing. But then we actually didn't make the amount of money that we needed to get the liability insurance, and so we actually decided to accept that risk temporarily, and because it was extremely hard to raise the funds when we weren't publishing, right? That's just what kind of a difficult thing to do. So anyway, and then in January 2020, we published this story that Ryan alluded to in his last comments.
Right, and that's the reason why we still don't have a board other than us, is because we fell short of that funding to get the insurance. Which, as you're going to see, has complicated our lives here in a second. But yeah, so then the other story we wanted to cover, when we resumed publishing, we published a story about a Border Patrol agent in Arizona who was, I don't even want to get into the details because it's one of the worst and most horrific instances of child abuse I've personally ever read. We published the court documents, so if you want to go and read them, you can. But this guy basically was creating the most horrific child pornography with his own children that you can even imagine, and distributing it online. And the worst part about this is that he had confessed this to his bishop at one point, apparently a full confession, telling the bishop that he was producing child pornography with his daughter and raping her. And the church, the court documents reveal that the church told the bishop to not call the police because Arizona is not a mandatory reporting state, and instead to just sort of provide, counseling. I don't remember what the exact term was, but basically, like meet with the bishop on a regular basis. And by the way, his wife was also in these meetings. She was full aware of what was going on and was essentially enabling him to do it. She, as far as we know, did not participate in the abuse, but essentially allowed it to happen. And the worst, if that isn't bad enough, after his confession to his bishop, not only did he continue to do what he was doing and continue to confess, but his wife gave birth to another girl, and he began to do these things with this new daughter as well. And so not only was the abuse not stopped on the older daughter, but abuse that could have been completely prevented on somebody was not prevented. And it's a heartbreaking story. The guy ended up, the authorities found out about it not because of the church. They found out about it because one of his videos was found on a computer in New Zealand, and the authorities traced it back to him. And so that's how he got caught. His wife went to prison for, I think, 2 years, I believe. I believe she's out for basically enabling it. And then he committed suicide in jail before he could be convicted or anything like that. So nothing really happened to him. This is a heart-wrenching story. And if it isn't enough to convince somebody that churches need to be mandatory reporters, then I don't think anything will convince them.
Just so you know, I regret that we didn't publish I put a content warning at the beginning of these slides. That in terms of the slides, that is the last story that we're going to be talking about when it has to do with sex abuse. That doesn't mean that it's going to come up in the question, that it's not going to come up in the question section though, but just FYI, for the last few slides here, there's no more sexual violence or exploitation content warning. So for those of you who remember back in like May of 2018, when we were still publishing under the name Mormon Leaks, we found these 13 LLCs that had $32 billion in the stock market, and we proved that the church was at the very least connected to them. And the church actually has outright recognized that they own and run these LLCs. And the way that I originally did that, that we were able to definitively tie those LLCs to the church was that a source pointed out to us that a bunch of domains were registered the same day to the church, and those domains happened to correspond with LLCs that were filing public reports to the SEC, the U.S. Security Exchange Commissions, and a company needs to file a report that's called a 13F to the Security Exchange Commission every quarter if they're trading more than $100 million in the U.S. stock market. And the public who is data, every single domain that you buy has the public information of the person, of the entity who bought it. It is possible to make it private, but the church didn't in this case. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they own it. I mean, I could go buy a domain and put all the church's information in there. And what we were able to do is I was actually, without getting too technical, using something called DNS records, I was able to prove that the church definitively controlled the authoritative DNS records for those. I give a talk that's on YouTube. You can find it on my personal website where I go into all those details, exactly how that works. Anyway, the church ended up moving those domains to a third party called Brand Shelter, right? And so Brand Shelter was then managing those DNS records and those domains. Well, the church was managing it through Brand Shelter, and Brand Shelter is a completely legitimate service. Many companies use things like those to protect their trademarks and stuff like that, make sure people aren't registering domains that are very similar to theirs and whatnot. And we actually purchased access to a database to go and see if the church moved any other domains to this third-party Brand Shelter. And so what I did was I looked at all the domains that Brand Shelter was hosting, and then I went and looked to see if historically the church was ever hosting them. And that actually revealed, we didn't find any more companies that were publicly trading, but we did find a venture capital arm of the church that was investing in pharma and tech companies, which was fascinating, which we didn't know about before. And then this was an interesting story that we published in March 2020. And it was actually in response to a story that the Salt Lake Tribune reported. Salt Lake Tribune does terrific work. I'm not trying to diminish the work that they're doing here, but they had one particular story that didn't quite have the whole picture. They published a story that Ensign Peak Advisors had reported $38 million to the SEC through this Form 13F, 38 billion, excuse me, not 38 million. And that was true. Ensign Peak Advisors had. And Ensign Peak Advisors, for those that don't know, that is like the publicly known financial arm of the church, right? But what the Salt Lake Tribune didn't notice or didn't report or something, but they definitely made it seem like that $38 billion was extra money that was in addition to the 32 billion and the 100 billion that the Washington Post had broken. But in reality, what the church had done was move all the money out of those 13 LLCs and put it in Ensign Peak Advisors, which was actually, it's an extremely small step towards transparency, but it is a step towards financial transparency for the church. And so this story that I published here, the Mormon Church moves public stock holdings to a single entity, was kind of correcting the record of what had actually happened, and that 38 billion was not extra money that we didn't previously know about. Really quick, I do want to touch on that Washington Post and then the follow-up article that the Wall Street Journal did, where the Washington Post broke the $100 billion story based off of whistleblower reports. And then the Wall Street Journal got unprecedented access to Ensign Peak Advisors in an interview. And that is where the church admitted to owning these 13 LLCs. That is where they said, they straight up admitted that they were trying to hide the money because they thought the people were gonna pay less tithing if they knew about it. I mean, I was reading that story and I was like, I can't believe they said that. So anyway, yeah, just the financial transparent, the fact that the church agreed to that interview with the Wall Street Journal and then has moved all of their public holdings to a single entity. Those are both two steps in the right direction towards transparency. They have a long way to go, but it is definitely a step in the right direction. That's for sure. And then, Ryan, let's just give them the high level.
Yeah, I'll just kind of briefly touch on this lawsuit that we recently were dealing with. We've done stories, not as much as with the Mormon related stories, but we've done stories on Jehovah's Witnesses. And we had a huge amount of files on our website that were related to Jehovah's Witnesses, and videos, internal memos, manuals, like the church manuals and things like that. Over 20,000 files we had. And the Jehovah's Witnesses served us with a lawsuit. They had carved out about, I think, 94 videos or something that we had on our website. 74 videos that we had on our website. They were basically like videos that they show at church, basically. I mean, it's a little bit more complicated than that, but that's essentially what they were, right?
They're like, the production quality is the equivalent of seminary videos.
Yeah. Imagine like seminary videos, right? So, but they aren't like made available to the public like the Mormon Church often does with these types of videos. So they weren't like on a website somewhere. So anyway, these videos had been registered with the U.S. Copyright Office, as copyrighted when they were originally made or whatever. And so they sued us for copyright infringement, wanted statutory damages and punitive damages. I think they wanted. They didn't say a number that they wanted, but just the statutory damages alone could have been in $5 or $6 million. I think. I don't remember what the exact tally was, but if we had gotten hit with the maximum penalty of statutory damages, it was $5 or $6 million. And Ethan and I were named personally, and the organization. Now, we felt at the time, and still feel to this day, that we were on solid footing in our ability to publish these documents. We were covered under fair use, and essentially every attorney we talked to agreed with us. We struggled to find a pro bono attorney because a lot of the people that would normally take up a case like this pro bono were inundated with issues related to like the Black Lives Matter protests and journalists that were being limited during that kind of stuff, and they had a lot of their focus on that.
Just a quick clarification, Ryan.
Yeah.
So we had a good argument, we feel, that when it came to fair use, but especially when it came to the First Amendment.
Right.
And part of the reason they filed the case in April, in the height of the coronavirus shutdown and everything, and so very few attorneys were willing to take pro bono as it is because of the oncoming recession, right? And then in the middle of all of it, that's when the Black Lives Matter protests started happening, and journalists started being attacked by police, and what media attorneys were left were completely inundated.
Right. All the pro bono attention was going towards those reporters, which, can't knock that, really. That probably was more important than us. We found an attorney that we felt comfortable with at the time, and he was very confident, and so were we, that we could be successful in a motion to dismiss. And we had a lot of precedent on our side, a lot of case law on our side, and all this kind of stuff. The problem is that it was going to cost between $30,000 and $40,000 to do that. And so we tried to do a fundraiser to raise that money, and we fell way short. I think we raised something like $13,000. So we fell way, way, way short, and we were getting close to our deadline to have to respond. We were, I don't know, maybe 2 weeks away roughly, and we had to just essentially pull the plug on the motion to dismiss approach and seek out a settlement so that we could just get out from under this. And that's ultimately what we did. Now, I'm going to just preemptively answer a question that some people may have about the settlement process, and simply say that about the settlement process itself, not the settlement, but the settlement process, we have no comment, and we wish we could comment. And you can go ahead and take with that whatever you want to assume or whatever, but if you ask any questions about the settlement process, okay, no comment. The settlement itself, we agreed to take down all of the Jehovah's Witnesses content that we had on our website. We agreed to not publish any more material that they've registered copyright with on a website that we control. And probably the hardest pill that we had to swallow is we agreed to pay them $15,000. And that's on top of about the $10,000 that we had to pay our attorney. So it was a huge blow to us that probably could have been avoided if we were better funded, but I mean, there's nothing we can really do about that. And we are going to resume publishing. We have some stories. There's one that I think will probably be a big story that's going to come out in the next couple of weeks. But as far as the long-term effects that this lawsuit is going to have on us, we don't know yet for certain. We are evaluating our future and how we will go about publishing. But as of right now, we are moving forward, and like this slide says, several investigations are underway, and reporting will continue. I would expect that, within the next couple of weeks, you'll see probably our first story as we come back from this lawsuit. And, that was emotionally draining on Ethan and I, and anybody who's been involved in a lawsuit, especially when you're dealing with, you're going up against what is likely a billion-dollar, multi-billion-dollar organization, and we essentially have no money. And it was a rough few months. I'll just say that.
Yeah, just a small clarification. We agreed to remove all of our Jehovah's Witnesses documents, not content. We have several stories about Jehovah's Witnesses that are still on our website. And we can continue to publish stories about Jehovah's Witnesses. We just can't publish documents that they have the copyright on. And that goes for the organization and Ryan and I personally forever, right? That's an unfortunate compromise we had to make, but that's the fact of the matter. So
the actual settlement is a public document, so you probably can find it out there if you want to go and
Yeah,
You know,
or they
if you're having
can find the.
If you're having trouble falling asleep tonight, go read it.
They could also see we lay out all the details in our press release, right?
Yeah.
So anyway, we've taken up 40 minutes, but we only wanted to take up 20. So let's get to the AMA.
All right, Heidi, you can go ahead and start filtering in questions. I don't know if they're there or not, but.
No, we've got plenty of questions. So there were several about the Watchtower settlement. And some of them I believe you already answered, that you are still able to report about them, but not share any of their documents or published material. Here's a question. I'm not sure if you're able to answer it if it's related to the settlement process, but hey Ryan, Watchtower settlement, sorry and really bummed about this. Did their claims have any merit, or was it just a financial necessity to settle? How do you avoid getting bullied by a bigger fish?
Yeah, I mean, I'm very confident in saying that we were on the winning side of the argument, but I also don't want to say that, it 100% guaranteed that we would have won. But their argument, I think, was very weak. And we had a lot of case law on our side. So I do feel like we were on the winning side of the argument. And it really was just a situation where we had to cut our losses. I mean, that was essentially it. And I mean, we just didn't have the money to do anything else. So it's rough. And it is a threat to small independent journalism like what we do. This is a very real threat. Yeah.
So a couple things there as a follow-up. One is the good thing, the fact that we settled, this doesn't establish any precedent. If somebody else finds themselves in the exact same situation, an attorney can't use this to argue precedent, right? So that is a weird bright side to all of this. Yeah. Another thing too is obviously I'm biased, so I'm salty about the situation. I'm not gonna lie, but it calls into question like the ethics of our legal system, right? Like that we were going up against an organization that's worth billions of dollars, right? And in our legal system, that whoever has the most money often wins, right? And then also copyright law started out as a good thing to help protect your creations so that you can make money off of them, but it is turned into, in many situations, a tool for censorship, right?
Yeah, I think they were, if you really get into the weeds on this lawsuit, which we probably don't have enough time to do here, and I don't really want to here because I think there's probably more important topics, but if you really get into the weeds of this case, I think to me it's clear that they were using copyright law in a way that it was not intended to be used.
Agreed.
Excellent, thank you. We have a few questions that have a common theme of kind of the comparison with Watchtower and Jehovah's Witness with the LDS Church. I'll just read them, and if you need me to repeat them later, I can do that. You never faced legal action by the LDS Church in the same way that you did with Watchtower. Has that changed your view of the LDS Church leadership in relations to other faiths? Are you anticipating the Mormon Church suing you, using the Watchtower situation as an example to prevent you from posting information about the church? And what are some similarities and differences that you've seen with your dealings with both Mormon leaders and Jehovah's Witness leaders?
Well, I think, that's a lot of questions there. So if we miss one of those questions, Heidi,
yeah, it's okay. I can repeat. They were all kind of connected, so
that's good. That's good. One of the key differences with the Jehovah's Witness case, with anything I think that the Mormon Church could come after us with, is that these 74 videos that they were claiming copyright on, they actually had a registered copyright with the U.S. government on those videos from the time that they made those videos. Now, we may have some content on our website that from the Mormon Church that is also registered. I don't think we do, and if we do, it's very minimal. One of the things that we are evaluating right now is whether or not we would maybe look for those things and possibly remove them. But the vast majority of the things, close to 100% of the things that we've published connected to the Mormon Church, is not registered with the Copyright Office. Now, does that mean that we're completely immune from a copyright claim? No, it doesn't, but it does create a little bit of a different dynamic. And the church did threaten legal action against us once via a copyright claim back in 2017 on something that, it was a PowerPoint presentation, which I guess in the very technical sense, when a PowerPoint is created through a business, they do own that PowerPoint. But it's not the same type of copyright situation as what the Jehovah's were coming at us with. I mean, it's a little bit different. I don't think it would carry the same weight. The reality is, I suppose we don't know what the Mormon Church is going to do or if they're going to do anything.
Yeah, and just I'm not. This is a little insight into the dynamics between Ryan and myself here. We're very good friends, but we disagree a lot of times.
He's going to have a different take on this.
And I personally am not comfortable saying that it's likely that the majority of the stuff that we have that they don't actually own a legal copyright to. Now, there's a difference between a legal copyright and a registered copyright. I'm not an attorney. I have no fucking clue, right? Excuse my French. I cuss a lot, but I don't have a clue, and that's why I'm not comfortable saying that. However, I will say that we were much more diligent in making sure whenever we published Mormon documents, because we had a lot more context and because we both grew up in the LDS Church, we were much better at ensuring that we were within the lines of fair use on almost every document that we published within Mormonism, right?
Which is offering commentary, which is what you're referring to. We have a lot more commentary on our commentary.
Which with these 74 videos that the J-Dubs got us with, we didn't offer any commentary aside from the article that we published announcing that we were releasing them. And that article had commentary from other J-Dubs, right, which we would have used in our, ex-Jehovah's Witnesses, excuse me, which we would have used in our argument in court, but we just never got our day in court to litigate this, and that's the unfortunate thing.
Our commentary on the Mormon content is definitely much more robust, making it harder to sue us. But I think, and something that's really just strictly my own personal opinion, and I could very well be wrong on this. I do think another thing that would cause the Mormon Church to at least pause and think about it more before suing us is they're much more mindful of the PR ramifications of something like this, whereas I don't think the Jehovah's Witnesses care as much about that. And I think Jehovah's Witnesses were probably, my guess is, more interested in sending a message to the people that put their stuff out there like us, whereas the Mormon Church would probably wonder, well, what kind of articles are going to come out of this? I think they would probably consider that a little bit more than the Jehovah's Witnesses would. There was another question in that line of questions about, does it make me see church leaders different? What was that question, Heidi?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I think my sound is glitchy. I apologize. I don't know how to fix that, but you never faced legal action by the LDS Church in the same way that you did with Watchtower. How has that changed your view of the LDS Church leadership in relations to other faiths?
Not really. I think if the Mormon Church felt they had a really, really, really strong case against us, I think they would sue us. So I don't think we're immune from a lawsuit from the church.
Yeah, and like we said, we tried to obtain liability insurance in order to protect us from these type of lawsuits, right? And to not be in the exact situation that we were with Jehovah's Witnesses. We continue to evaluate our situation in order to protect us from those situations and minimize our liability, while still doing our job as reporters, right, and speaking truth to religious power. That's just something that we're constantly going to have to figure out. I mean, it's no secret that Ryan and we had no background in journalism before we started doing this, and we've been flying by the seat of our pants and consulting a lot of other journalists and attorneys as we go with it. But we've been figuring things out as we go. I mean, I don't think that's any secret.
Thank you. This question is about the Ensign Peak. I know that you brought it up. You mentioned it earlier, but just wanting to reiterate that in case they would like to know a little bit more of your opinion. Any new news on the related $120 billion and the charity status of Ensign Peak?
I don't think there's really any new news. One thing I would encourage people to understand about that, I think that $120 billion leak, the information that was put out there is very valuable and really good and important, but I would caution people to put a lot of stock in the claim that they were violating any kind of codes with the IRS. I'm not going to definitively say that they weren't, but my gut tells me that there's not much there. And one of the things that the Washington Post kind of glommed onto, I think, because this was the claim from this guy Nelson, the whistleblower, was that, you know, this idea that this was Ensign Peak's money. And I think that's one of the flaws in the analysis. None of that money that Ensign Peak is controlling is technically their money. It is the church's money. So one of the things that the claim was is that in terms of them violating their charter as a nonprofit, Ensign Peak, not the church, but Ensign Peak, is that they were not using this money in an appropriate way. But the thing is, it wasn't their money to begin with. They were simply managing the church's money. But I guess time will tell on that if the IRS decides to, you know, open an investigation and something happens. But generally speaking, I do think that a lot of valuable information came out of that leak to help us understand the bigger picture of what the church's total net worth is. Ethan, you had something there, I think.
I mean, sorry, I don't think Ensign Peak is a nonprofit, right? Like,
no, they are.
They are.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
okay. That's
like the basis of the IRS claim is that they're a nonprofit that is not acting in accordance with the nonprofit rules. That's the claim. That's essentially the claim. Okay. Right.
Cool.
But I think that argument breaks down once you realize that none of that money is Ensign Peak's money. Mm-hmm. Right. It's just like if you go to some hedge fund or money manager and, you know, you give them $100,000 that you've saved up, and then, you know, they invest in whatever, and you get your interest or whatever it is you do with that money. That's not the money manager's money. So, and I think the church itself, who would be the one entity that would have to be looked at as far as are they acting appropriately with their nonprofit status, I think it's going to be pretty hard to say that they're not.
And the thing is, too, the church has very little incentive. I mean, and Ryan, you as a financial professional, you could expand on this a lot more than I could, but the church has very little incentive to cut corners because they have so much money, right? That it's not worth them cutting those corners and potentially losing the money to fines and stuff.
Yeah, and we've talked about this a little bit before, but yeah, it's worth reiterating. You know, they make so much money following the rules. I've often compared this to the gaming industry here in Las Vegas. I used to be a regulatory auditor with the Gaming Control Board, and I was heavily involved in the regulation of those companies. And one of the questions I would often get from people when they would ask me about my work, you know, they would always say, "Oh, well, you know, which casino's cheating?" and, you know, all this stuff. And the reality is that none of them are cheating. And it's almost never that you actually find like blatant cheating or of the system, of the gaming systems, because aside from, well, first of all, there's all kinds of controls in place, but even setting that aside, they're making tens of millions and in the hundreds of millions with some of the bigger casinos following the rules. Why would they break the rules to make a couple extra $1 million? It just doesn't make sense. And so I think that people need to realize that applies to the church as well. There's this, there's a CPA, there's a document I don't think we've ever released because it's really not that exciting, but where the church reached out to an outside CPA firm to provide analysis on some issue they were dealing with. I don't remember what the issue was, but they wanted the CPA firm to provide analysis to the church on how to proceed to make sure that they were not breaking any laws, tax laws, other types of laws that would come into play. So it's very clear to me that the church does everything that they can to try to follow the law. And the unfortunate thing really is that the laws in our country are such that nonprofit religious institutions have a pretty wide latitude when it comes to when it comes to what they're allowed to do that would lead them to even have over $100 billion in assets. I don't know. I kind of got a little jumbled there, but that's my answer. Next.
Thank you. Some other topics. Any thoughts on the Gaddy v. LDS lawsuit from last year?
Is that the tithing one? Is that the one? I don't know who asked that question, but I think that's the one where the lady wanted her tithing back or something like that.
I can look it up real quick and get back to you.
Here, I'll look at, what was it? How did they spell
Gaddy,
it?
Gaddy.
Let's see. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I know this case. Yeah. So yeah, I think that case to me, I'll be very blunt on this one. That case in particular, and any arguments in general about trying to say that the church owes people their tithing back because it's a fraud is an absolute waste of time, in my opinion. And I predicted at the time when she filed it, to much criticism actually on Facebook and other places, I predicted that it would be thrown out of court, and it was thrown out of court because there's no basis for the argument, right? Like it, from a legal standpoint. Emotionally, obviously, we were all duped, and of course, would feel better. We all feel now that we gave the money under false pretenses. But if you look at the very core of the case, right? If her case would have won and succeeded, then basically every church in the United States that makes any kind of claim, let's just say like about Adam and Eve, for example, would now be forced to refund their money. And while that might sound like a really good idea on paper or something like that to somebody who doesn't like churches or whatever, I think that would be a disaster. And I don't think that would be really good for anybody. I mean, I could get more into it, I guess. But yeah, I think people who, if you want to make a change in religions and the way they operate and getting them to be more honest or whatever, I just don't think that's the way to do it, because it's a losing argument. And now what happens? Oh, you see, they lost the case. It got thrown out of court. See, just a bunch of ex-Mormons who were just mad, and they have no rational argument because look at this dumb argument they were making about tithing. And it does nothing but hurt the conversation and the credibility of people who want to actually have serious conversations about, actual dishonesty and whatnot. So maybe I don't know if I ruffled some feathers of the 67 attendees in here right now, but I apologize if I did.
Any thoughts about the conservative activist trend in Supreme Court of the United States and how that will affect religious liberty legal cases you all deal with in the near future?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't think either of us are really qualified to talk about that.
I'm a supporter of religious freedom. I mean, I don't think religion should lie and stuff, but I don't think, if a religious leader gets up, Mormon or let's say in the case of Mormon, since probably everybody here is connected to Mormonism in some way. If a religious leader gets up and says that they believe the Book of Mormon is a historical document of events that literally happened, I don't think it's fair to say that that person is inherently lying, because they may actually believe that. And, I think when you try to claim that they are intentionally lying, I think it becomes problematic, right? So you could probably make the argument that Joseph Smith, I think you can make the argument that Joseph Smith was intentionally lying about things, right? Because obviously he was not viewing words appear in a hat, just as an example, right? I think I'm comfortable saying Joseph Smith was lying about that, right? But fast forward 150 years, I'm not comfortable saying that, my former mission president, Shane Bowen, who's in First Quorum of the 70, whatever it's called, I'm not comfortable calling him a liar because I think he truly believes. So is he wrong? Of course he's wrong, right? I think, and I think with the apostles, it becomes a little bit trickier. You could maybe make, to me, the biggest proof that the apostles are liars to me is their silence on whether or not they've seen Jesus, because they know that a massive number of Mormons believe they have actually physically seen Jesus Christ, right? They know that exists out there, and they do nothing to dispel that myth, essentially. Outside of maybe, you might be able to pull the one quote from Oakes where he doesn't even say that, he kind of alludes to it. But I think that the fact that they don't try to correct that misconception, I think is a mark of maybe some intentional deception. But that's, 15 of all the leaders, right? So yeah, Ethan can say what he thinks on that topic.
Yeah, that's another area where Ryan and I disagree on, but I don't necessarily want to get super into it. But I will say this, that I also support religious liberty, and I think the vast majority of Americans do. But religious liberty is extremely misunderstood by a lot of people, and like, I don't want to generalize at all, but like the question specifically brought up conservatives and in the Supreme Court, religious liberty at its very core allows you, gives you the freedom to practice your religion, whatever it is, and then the protection to not be discriminated against because of your religion. And that's it, right? None of this, like, I'm sorry, I'm blanking on an example, but at the very core, that's what religious liberty is. That's 100% what I support, right? The separation of church and state is extremely fuzzy in this country, right? And I don't want to go down that rabbit hole because we could have a whole hour and a half talk just on that.
Let's say there's always room for improvement, right?
Yeah. So anyway, that's where I stand. Right.
You guys are we're getting some heavy. I don't think we've ever gotten heavy questions like this before. This is interesting.
Maybe the screens and typing makes it a little more comfortable.
Yeah.
Who knows?
Yeah.
Any knowledge of what changes the church can or will be coming out with?
No, I don't. We're not aware of anything that's imminent.
Yeah, I mean, I think everybody supposedly they're changing up the temple ceremony, right?
Yeah, they announced that.
That's public knowledge, right? Yeah. So and yeah, we no. The answer is we don't have anything.
All right, these are just a couple comments that are going back to some things, but I'll just share them. So back with the enzyme peak, I think the issue with EPA was the movement of money between the churches' for-profit portions of their investments versus their nonprofit organizations. Do you agree with that?
I know that was an element of it, yeah, where they bailed out one of their, or maybe it was two of their for-profit. I can't remember exactly, but yeah. Yeah, I mean, look, if there is something they did wrong, hopefully they'll be held accountable for it. I don't think it's, anything that they may have done wrong. I seriously doubt it's going to result in some life-changing fine or anything like that.
Or even this, I'm sorry, but the idea that, I'm just going to be blunt, and I'm probably going to get shit for this on Twitter or Facebook tonight. But this pipe dream that the church is going to lose, or any of the church's entities are going to lose their nonprofit status over it, is that's a pipe dream. That's not going to happen, especially not in the United States.
Yeah, and I think, look, if people who are sort of in a fight the church mentality, I think that if you're not being strategic, if that's sort of the hill you're trying to die on. I don't think we should want necessarily the church to lose their nonprofit status or anything like that. Because once you start getting into the government dictating so much of how a church or a nonprofit, spends their money, and they should dictate to a certain extent, right? There should be guidelines, right? But that dictation can go too far, and ultimately, the Mormon church is not the only church out there, right? Not the only nonprofit out there, and you never know sort of how that sort of overarching control can backfire. I think the better approach to improving the way the church, if the goal is I want the church to spend their money differently. If that's the person's goal, and by the way, that's not my goal. I personally couldn't care less how the church spends their money. I'm interested in them being transparent about how they spend their money. But if you're really, really interested in trying to get the church to change the way they spend their money or bring their money in, et cetera, I think it's pushing for transparency, and I think it's pushing for the people that are current members to call for a change, because that's really, in a situation like this, is probably likely the only way you're going to get a real substantive change is, for example, I'll give you an example. If you have, I remember when I was in the young men's presidency before I left the church, and everybody I'm sure who's been involved in this, even on the young women's side, have experienced something like this, where we had to go and sit outside of Smith's grocery store or whatever and try to sell chocolate bars to strangers in order to pay for whatever the summer 1 week long summer trip was, right? If an entire ward or an entire stake said, no, we're not doing it. We're not doing this. The church has $100 billion. I think they can pay, if they want to pay for a youth trip, they can pay for a youth trip. Maybe that's a little extreme. Maybe the parents can chip in the money, whatever. But this idea that you got to go and beg for money, that's an area where I think people on the ground can send a message up the chain of like, no, we're not putting up with this anymore, because our $2,500 annual budget that you gave us is no good.
Yeah. And in terms of nonprofit status, there is actually something super interesting happening in Australia right now, and the J-Dubs, the Jehovah's Witnesses, are in the center of it. This doesn't have anything to do with the LDS Church, but there was an investigation by the Australian government into sex abuse within religious institutions in Australia, and they found I believe it was like 25 or more religious institutions that had a systemic problem with sexual abuse, and the Australian government ordered that they pay so much money to each survivor, and several organizations, including the Jehovah's Witnesses, have come forward. They haven't necessarily publicly said anything, but they have not paid that yet. And the Australian government said that if they do not pay that they will lose their nonprofit status in Australia. So that's actually something super interesting that's happening outside of the U.S. But the U.S. is so much more friendly to religions than so many other countries.
On that note, Ethan, that's a really great point that you bring up. Another thing that I would love to see ex-Mormons rally around in Utah, where obviously there's a ton of ex-Mormons, is this, issue of mandatory reporting. There was a mandatory reporting bill snaking its way through the Utah legislature. I have a feeling it may be dead at this point, but that doesn't mean they can't, do it again in another year. But everybody that wants the church to sort of do a better job with victims of sex abuse, yes, that's a great and noble thing to want, but you're not going to really get that change just by making posts about it on Facebook, right, and getting people riled up. Organize. 10,000 people show up on Capitol Hill. Forget the church. Go show up at the Utah Capitol Hill before the legislative session and demand that they make clergy mandatory reporting. That will create more change than any awareness that you can bring on Facebook. Because sure, that won't necessarily prevent all the sex abuse, right? But it will bring more justice, and it would prevent sort of future sex abuse, like the story that we did about the guy in Arizona where he confessed and then continue to abuse more people. So, I think it would be much more powerful to see 10, 20,000, however many people you can get out there on Capitol Hill the day they're going to vote for one of these bills. Find one of the state senators or whatever that'll go. What was the one lady's name, Ethan? The state senator.
Romero.
What is it?
Angela Romero.
Angela Romero, and I'm sure there's others. Contact them. See how you can help. Organize. That's real change right there if you can get that.
And the another thing too is I agree with that, and there are so many instances throughout the history of the United States that point to it's much easier to change people's minds after you change policy, right? And so if you can get policy changed, like for Obamacare is a perfect example, right? Everybody hated, well, everybody in Utah and all the right wing hated Obamacare, and now the majority, the data and polls and surveys show that the majority of conservatives now support Obamacare, and it's been policy for years now. And so anyway,
most, you know, if you track social media, which I do pretty closely in Mormon circles, most Mormons in Utah actually believe that their bishops report. They believe that their bishops are reporting, and they think they're mandatory reporters. Mm-hmm. They don't realize that they're not reporting and that they're not mandatory reporters. So the reality is that most Mormons, when push come to shove, actually support mandatory reporting. So somebody that's listening to this, hopefully maybe a light bulb goes off. I don't have the bandwidth to do it, and I'm not living in Utah. But I really think this should be where the battle is taken next, to the Capitol building there in Utah. Everybody show up and demand that these people ignore the church and remove the mandatory, implement the mandatory reporting, remove the exemption that they have.
Yep.
So we have a question that follows right into with what you're saying. I think you've already answered most of it. What states do or don't require reporting to authorities, and does the church now say they need to report no matter what state? I think you just answered that's a no, but which church, which state?
There's like 13, right?
Yeah, so we did a lot of work around this. In December of 2018, we were actually engaging in this activism in the state of California, and we actually went and spoke to lawmakers in California to remove their clergy exemption. Anyway, but I can't. There are about 13 states that do require clergy to report. It could be more now. I haven't looked into it since then. And actually, ironically, they're actually extremely religious states. I don't know. I'm talking about like Texas and Mississippi and West Virginia and whatnot. But what's interesting is none of them, and this is just an observation, correlation is not causation, so don't go freak out, but this is super interesting. They're all like evangelically religious states and not necessarily Catholic religious states, right? And that was actually, when we went to California, the Catholic Church was what came out swinging so hard against our bill in California. So
I know I can't speak for Ethan on this, but I know that I personally, I was surprised to find out when we met with a bunch of lawmakers in Sacramento, pretty much every single one of them, well, first of all, they all loved our proposal, and one of them, you know, obviously sponsored the bill, but they all said the biggest battle is going to be the Catholic Church lobbying. And I didn't realize, you know, you look at California as being this like really secular state when it comes to like their laws and stuff, but apparently the Catholic Church is a very, very powerful lobby in California, and it showed because the bill got killed. I do think the guy's gonna, the senator that sponsored it, I think he is gonna try again at some point. But there was something that you said that kind of, oh, I know what I was gonna say. You know, a couple of years ago, we published a spreadsheet from Kirkton McConkie where they had kind of notes on cases that they were dealing with that involved sex abuse or whatever. And there was one case in particular where we redacted the states and a lot of the information, but I'm not going to say which states that were involved, but the notes were that Kirkton McConkie wanted the church to send this missionary home for what he did. And the church missionary department didn't want to send him home because the state, his home state, which obviously was not Utah, his home state was a mandatory reporting state, and they were concerned that his stake president would have to report what this kid had confessed to, and the state that he was serving in was not a mandatory reporting state. So the church is very laser focused in on this issue, and they will follow the law when they need to. Like if you look, they will report in these mandatory reporting states, but they will take full advantage of the exemptions where they exist.
What's really interesting is along those lines that I can't speak definitively for the Jehovah's Witnesses, but the Jehovah's Witnesses have several cases in several states where they were supposed to report. Montana, the biggest one is in Montana, and they didn't report. And that's the contrast between the Jehovah's Witnesses and the Mormons, is that the Jehovah's Witnesses believe that any organization that is not their organization is inherently corrupt, especially when it comes to government. So they actually do all like criminal investigations in their own court system internally, right? Yeah. So they do not report anything to police, which is fascinating and extremely sad.
All right, moving on to another topic. What was the outcome of the MTC President Bishop case?
I believe it's still being litigated. I believe I think most of the case has been thrown out. There was an article, people will have to Google this because I'm honestly blanking on the specifics, but there was a recent article about how most of the case was thrown out. There was a few claims that the judge allowed to stay, and I believe they're trying to like settle or something like that. I don't know. Well, we're not really go ahead, Ethan.
The church has been granted discovery to McKenna Denson's electronic devices.
Right.
That's the most recent article.
Right. And she claims that her phone was stolen or something like that. And so doesn't remember her password or something. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. But other than that, we don't know.
Yeah. Obviously a lot of stuff has come out, since we published that story about McKenna Denson's credibility, which is all good stuff. I mean, she definitely has a credibility problem. I would remind people and encourage you to go back and look at our original posting on this, which we have not edited, on the wiki page. Our focus of that recording was the things that Joseph Bishop admitted to on the tape. And we never reported that he had, abused McKenna. Although personally, I do think he probably did do something to her, probably, which did she embellish it or whatever? I don't know. But he admitted, regardless of what McKenna Denson's situation is and what he did or didn't do to her, which he never admits to doing anything to her. He claims he doesn't really remember, but he does admit to being inappropriate with a number of other women. So that was really the focus of our post. We kind of knew that McKenna Denson had some credibility issues. We didn't know to the extent that we now know, right? But we knew that there was enough question there that we were very careful in how we worded our reporting, and the real focus should be on the things that Joseph Bishop admits to, which are bad enough. And there's a reference in that tape where he talks about a young woman. She was a young woman at the time, back in the MTC with McKenna, who he had, had some inappropriate contact with. And, I was actually able to track, we've redacted her name. I don't think her name's ever been out there in the public, but I was able to track her down and spoke to her once on the phone. And she pretty much, she was, by the way, completely unaware of the story about Joseph Bishop, because she doesn't live in Utah and lives on the other side of the country and is somewhat, I guess, just didn't see the news or whatever. But she basically recounted everything that Joseph Bishop said and a little bit more. But so there are victims of Joseph Bishop out there for sure. Whether or not McKenna Denson is one of those, I suppose that's up in the air. I kind of lean on the side that he probably was inappropriate with her in some way, but I'm not comfortable saying how much or in what ways, just because of all of the lies that she has told. I don't know.
Awesome, thank you. There are some comments about NDAs that maybe you can look at in the app and reply to. I've got 3 questions left, 2 kind of fun questions at the end and 1 quick one. Now that the church has gone away from the Boy Scouts of America, have you heard any remorse for leaving?
No, in fact, everything I've seen and heard is people saying, "Oh yeah, we never liked the Boy Scouts to begin with," which I don't believe either. But yeah, I think most people have taken that tact of like, yeah, this is what we wanted the whole time.
Awesome. All right. What would be your wish list for documents from insiders to send you?
I don't know.
I got
ahead,
one.
Ethan. Go ahead. Go ahead.
I want to see the membership system, like the UI that the bishops interact with. Sorry, UI stands for user interface. I want to see the interface that bishops use when they're inputting notes from bishops' interviews, and then what in turn what is sent to your mission president or to your stake president. And I want to understand how that entire flow happens, and what each leader actually sees.
Yeah, I one of my fascinations is, and I think we maybe published some things on this before, but not a lot. I love individual ward financials. I love to see the breakdown of what an individual ward brings in, how much they send to Salt Lake City, what their, how much of that money stays and that kind of thing. It's just kind of, I guess the accountant in me really likes that stuff. But, generally speaking though, I mean, we don't really have an official wish list. That people should send us anything that they think should be made public, I guess.
Yeah, I agree. I will say this though, me being a tech professional, I try and focus on stories with a technical bent to them, and I am fascinated by the church's surveillance on missionaries. So if you have anything about that, please reach out to me.
Yeah, I'm also Ethan understands that issue more than I do, but I also, as somebody who served their mission before the days of smartphones and really, although the internet existed, it was early enough in the internet days that we weren't really allowed to use the internet at all. We weren't allowed to use email or anything. So there was no surveillance when I was on my mission. And I do find it fascinating, the amount of potential surveillance that is there. I suppose we don't know to the extent. Sometimes, by the way, I occasionally get messages from missionaries through various methods, I guess, that I would guess could be tracked, and I don't know if they are or not, but some missionaries don't seem to care to a certain degree. Although one missionary once messaged me and was asking me to send him an actual document that he had heard about that was on our website, because he didn't want to go to our website on his tablet because of the security software. And so he was asking me through a message for me to send the document to him directly, which I thought was interesting. But yeah.
Awesome. And this is our last question. What's next for you guys going forward? Any new projects you can tell us about?
Yeah, I mean, we've got stories, we don't like to do teasers. We do have a story that I think will be a big story.
And that's all we're going to say about it.
That's all we're going to say about it. We are working on it right now, like full time. It's a story that we've spent countless hours on. I'm not going to get into it. It's a big piece that we're working on.
As we said earlier, we have several investigations that are ongoing, and we will continue to publish. We are evaluating the best way to do that going forward. This lawsuit put a lot of stuff in perspective for us, and we both have day jobs. We both have kids, right? And this is something that we do in our free time. I have put a lot of my own money towards this, right? So anyway, I'm not saying that. I mean, we would love your donations if you want to donate to truthandtransparency.org/donate. But please be patient with us too when it comes to these stories, because we have a lot of other.
They're coming
in our lives.
And the one story that we're working on that we've somewhat vaguely hinted to will not be affected by us reevaluating the way we move forward. This story is coming out no matter what, because it doesn't involve potential copyright claims in any way, shape, or form. So this story is coming out within the next couple of weeks. But yeah, like how to move forward, sort of big picture, is what we're sort of reevaluating in order to be super effective. But yeah, if donations are good. I think we have a little over $1,000 in the bank, and I'm telling you, we still need some money for some things that we've got going on. If you guys want to message me to know more specifics about what that is, I'm happy to answer. I'm not going to get into it here on the video, but yes, we are still in need of, the lawsuit has wiped us out financially, and we need to recover in some way.
All right. We've had a couple more questions pop in. Do you want to go through? Okay, let's go for it. We've got 5 minutes.
You're in charge, Heidi. So whatever, it's your call.
Okay.
That way they'll be mad at you. They'll be mad at you and not us. If their question
Okay,
doesn't
great.
get asked.
I would like to know what the SCMC has actually been involved with. I would like to know how many actual members there are in detail.
Yeah, I mean, I have seen a document that showed the, I believe it was 2 apostles and 3 members of the 70 that chair that, the Strengthening the Church Members Committee. And it was from a couple years ago, so I don't think it's the current set of people. But look, I generally, we don't really have any inside information on that, except to say my personal feeling is, from talking to people that work at the church office building and that know a little bit about this stuff, is that, the claims that you often see online about what this group does are greatly exaggerated. I think essentially what they do is they monitor social media and other forms of public communication, and keep tabs on critics and issues that affect the church, and so that the church can act when they need to. I think any kind of claims beyond that, I've never seen them to be substantiated. I'm not saying they don't do more things than that, but I just haven't seen any evidence of it.
Sorry,
No,
muted.
Yeah.
What is the boundary line for pastoral reporting exceptions? In other words, is the local young men's president required to report? A home teacher? A confession could be spoken to clergy at any level?
My understanding, and maybe there's attorneys out there that can clarify this at some point, but my understanding is that the exemption does not apply to those lower than bishop positions that are out there. So if somebody goes to their young men's president, I believe that they would have to report. It's my understanding of it. It's just the bishop, and I think maybe the stake president, are what can be considered the clergy in this context.
Okay, thank you. There's another question, but if there's a few replies on it, and so I think it would be best for you guys to go and just look at it, because it's if you're okay with that. But yeah, thank you so much. Thank you. It was a very fascinating session, I think, for everybody, and thank you to everyone for posting your questions and making it a lively session.
If I just may say real quick, just to close it out, appreciate everybody joining and participating. Ethan and I are both pretty accessible on social media. Ethan's more on Twitter. I'm probably more on Facebook than he is. And then our emails are on the website. If anybody wants to reach out to us for any reason, we try to be very accessible. So, feel free, if we didn't answer your question or you have a question about something that we said you want us to talk about further, reach out.
Awesome.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Everyone have a great night. We'll see you tomorrow. Thanks.